The lights drop. The arena goes silent. And then boom, fire erupts across the SmackDown stage. Through the smoke. She appears. The Eradicator. The Nightmare. Rhea Ripley is back. That moment. It wasn't just a wrestling return. It was a seismic event that shook the foundations of an entire universe. We're not talking about ratings or title reigns right now. We're talking about the feeling. Imagine being in that arena. The air instantly went from a dull, collective anticipation to a raw, electric shockwave. It's the kind of sound that you don't just hear. You feel it in your bones. A guttural, unified roar of 15,000 people who thought they knew what was coming next, only to realize they were completely wrong. Her entrance music, a defiant, heavy metal anthem, didn't just play. It announced a reckoning. For 6 long months, the women's division had been functioning in a state of uneasy peace, a competitive lull that now felt exposed as a fragile illusion. Every champion, every contender, every commentator, they all just had their immediate future rewritten in a flash of pyro and a sneering, triumphant look from the most dominant force in modern wrestling. The return wasn't just about Rhea Ripley. It was about the immediate, terrifying reality that everything was about to change. It's the moment when the whole world holds its breath, captivated by the return of a force of nature. The reaction in the crowd was pure adrenaline, but the atmosphere backstage was something entirely different. Cold, calculating dread. The returning theme music echoed down the concrete hallways, an uninvited guest crashing a private party. We hear the immediate, sharp silence of the locker room. The women who had just finished a high-stakes match stood frozen, their victorious celebration instantly forgotten. You could almost feel the plans being shredded, the title aspirations vaporized. This wasn't just about a potential challenger. This was a psychological weapon suddenly deployed. The reigning champion, let's call her the Sentinel, was reportedly watching from a monitor in a quiet room, and sources say her face went pale, not from fear, but from a sudden, heavy recognition of the immense workload that just dropped onto her shoulders. This return isn't just about rivalry. It's about the burden of legacy. Rhea Ripley wasn't coming back for a friendly match. She was coming back to reclaim a throne she felt was rightfully hers, a throne that the current champion had worked tirelessly, in her absence, to solidify. The quiet, unspoken truth among the other wrestlers was this: no one wanted to face her, not yet. They'd gotten comfortable building their own narratives, their own rivalries. Now, every single one of those carefully constructed storylines was relegated to a side plot. The air was thick with competitive envy, mixed with a deep, professional respect. It wasn't hatred. It was the chilling awe reserved for someone who operates on a completely different level, the kind of competitor who doesn't just win a match, but irrevocably breaks the person she defeats. Within minutes of the pyro fading, the entire internet was swallowed by the Rhea Ripley phenomenon. This wasn't just a trending topic. It was a complete digital avalanche. The phrase, "she's back," rocketed to the top of every global trending list, followed closely by the singular, powerful word, nightmare. The immediate reaction wasn't just typical fan chatter. It was a deep emotional release. For months, the digital landscape had been peppered with frustrated, yearning posts from the mommy faithful, asking when their queen would return, demanding action. That collective pent-up energy was unleashed in a spectacular, digital tidal wave. The tweets and posts weren't just simple declarations of excitement. They were deeply personal. Fans talked about the anxiety they felt watching the women's division without her edge, the lack of real danger. Her return wasn't just a spectacle. It was a validation of their patience and loyalty. Media analysts quickly noted that this was a rare moment where a professional wrestling return completely dominated mainstream sports news feeds, pushing aside basketball scores and football headlines. The power of her brand transcended the genre. Everyone, from hardcore wrestling observers to casual viewers, was talking about the sheer audacity and commanding presence of her entrance. It was a viral moment that became cultural shorthand for game-changing. This wasn't marketing genius. It was genuine, overwhelming emotional response. The world felt a little more dangerous, a little more exciting, and a lot less predictable all because of one woman's triumphant walk through smoke and fire. The digital roar quickly translated into an immediate, almost unbearable pressure on the reigning champion. The champion, who had fought long and hard to earn her spot, was now instantly reduced in the eyes of the public, not through any fault of her own, but purely by the shadow of Rhea Ripley's return. The narrative shifted from the champion's great reign to how long can she survive. The champion's social media mentions were a toxic mix of support and outright doubt. Every former rival, every critic, and every armchair expert started dissecting her past victories, questioning their legitimacy now that the true eradicator was back in the fold. This is the hidden consequence of a monumental return. It doesn't just elevate the returnee, it diminishes everyone else by comparison. The champion, an incredibly focused and strong-willed competitor, now had to deal with the overwhelming psychological weight of this legacy confrontation. It's an internal battle against external noise. She'd earned the right to be celebrated, yet now she felt like a caretaker of a title that was simply waiting for its true owner to return. The pressure isn't just to win. It's to somehow prove that her 6 months of dedication weren't just a placeholder period. That's a mental strain that's harder to overcome than any physical fight. Every media appearance, every backstage interview, would now revolve around a single, agonizing question. Are you ready for the nightmare? The champion's private moment of peace had been violently stripped away. The emotional ripple effect of Rhea's fiery return extended far beyond the arena and the internet. It landed directly in the quiet, supportive embrace of her family and close, personal circle. While the world saw a dominant, almost mythical figure, her loved ones saw the return of the intense, emotional, and physical commitment that defines her life. The phone calls that night weren't focused on the pyrotechnics. They were about the subtle change in her voice, the immediate resurgence of that laser-like focus she adopts when the chase is on. For a family member, watching Rhea Ripley on screen is a mixture of profound pride and deep-seated worry. The cheers are fantastic, but the knowledge of the bumps, the injuries, and the relentless travel schedule immediately overshadows the glory. They know the cost of being the nightmare. They know the sacrifice. A simple text message from her mother reportedly read, "We saw the fire. Be safe, Mommy." It's a beautifully simple encapsulation of the internal conflict. They celebrate the icon, but they worry about the woman. Her younger siblings reportedly felt an immediate resurgence of pride and a strange, protective urge, knowing that the spotlight and the resulting scrutiny would be blinding. This is the quiet, unseen sacrifice of any major star. The moment they step back into the spotlight, they implicitly ask their family to shoulder a portion of the emotional burden, the pressure, and the fear of injury. The fireworks are for the crowd. The commitment is for the few people who know the real, vulnerable human beneath the armor. The most fascinating emotional dynamic unfolded within the structure of her former alliance, the Judgment Day. While the group, consisting of 3 other dominant personalities, had continued to thrive and evolve in her absence, her return created an immediate, unspoken crisis of leadership and loyalty. The group's success had been built, in large part, on her terrifying aura, but with her gone, they had been forced to step up, to carve out their own separate identities and achieve success. Without their guiding mommy, her return demanded an instant, flawless return to absolute subservience, and that's where the tension lay. It wasn't about if they were loyal. They absolutely were. It was about the ego, the pride, and the newfound confidence they had developed in her absence. One of the members, a quiet but ambitious competitor, reportedly showed a flicker of hesitation, an almost imperceptible moment of "now, what about my push?" The beauty of the Judgment Day's power is its unified front, but Rhea Ripley's individual star power is so immense that it threatens to overshadow the whole structure. Her return wasn't a gentle reunion. It was a reassertion of dominance, a nonverbal command to fall back in line. The question wasn't if they would join her, but if they would resent the immediate, necessary contraction of their own light to illuminate hers. The bond was one of genuine respect and terrifying shared purpose, but even the strongest alliances must bend when a true force of nature decides to reappear. The mainstream media's initial reporting on the return was overwhelmingly positive, but the analysis quickly became a voracious feeding frenzy. Every talk show, every podcast, and every sports segment immediately hit the narrative reset button. The story of the women's division, which had been a complex, tapestry of emerging stars and solid veterans was suddenly boiled down to a single, monolithic question. Can anyone stop Rhea Ripley? The media loved this simple high-stakes premise. It created drama, it drew eyeballs, and it was easy to market. The problem, as always, was the reduction of human complexity to a headline. The media wasn't interested in the nuances of her injury, the grueling rehabilitation, or the mental fortitude it took to return at peak performance. They wanted the simple, shocking story of the Destroyer is back. This media focus had an immediate, chilling effect on the division. The emerging talent, who had just begun to earn significant column inches, found their profiles dramatically minimized. They were now framed not as stars, but as sacrificial lambs, fodder for the returning powerhouse. This relentless media machine created a false dichotomy. Rhea Ripley, the unstoppable force, versus the field, the collection of unfortunate souls in her path. This narrative created a pressure cooker for every performer, forcing them to over-deliver and prove their worth against a media-generated image of invincibility. It transformed a competitive landscape into a psychological gauntlet, dictated by the relentless thirst of the 24-hour news cycle for a clear hero and villain. The champion's scheduled media appearances in the days following the return became excruciatingly difficult. What should have been triumphant press conferences and celebratory interviews turned into isolated defenses of her reign. Every question was a thinly veiled trap. Do you feel your reign has been illegitimate? Will you be able to handle the size difference? What did you think of the Piro? The champion handled it with professional grace, but internally, the isolation was immense. She was now fighting a war on two fronts. The physical battle awaiting her and the psychological war being waged by the media and the relentless, doting public. Her responses, often articulate and determined, were frequently edited down to sound defensive or overly cautious, further feeding the unstoppable Rhea narrative. Her carefully crafted sound bites about training and preparation were often overshadowed by a single, dramatic quote from a rival or a hyperbolic prediction from a commentator. This forced isolation is a subtle form of mental warfare. The champion, a strong personality herself, suddenly felt the overwhelming weight of fighting an external narrative that had already declared her the loser. She reportedly stopped watching wrestling news shows, focusing only on her training footage and her opponent's past Mateus. The only way to survive the media-feeding frenzy was to unplug, to silence the noise, and to retreat into the only thing that mattered. Her own conviction. The champion knew that the true victory wouldn't be in a soundbite. It would be in a single, hard-fought moment of defiance in the ring, a moment the media was already predicting she would never have. As the initial shock of Rhea Ripley's return subsided, a quieter, more profound emotion began to settle over the entire situation. The heavy weight of the crown itself. For Rhea, the return wasn't just a triumphant moment. It was the immediate, suffocating realization that she had to be better than before. The expectations placed upon her by the fans, the media, and perhaps, most intensely, by herself were mountainous. Her former reign was legendary, but returning from injury meant restarting the narrative from zero, with the added pressure of proving that the time off hadn't dulled her edge or weakened her resolve. The moments alone, in the quiet of a sterile hotel room after the adrenaline wore off, are reportedly where the real emotional toll set in. The fire and the bravado are the necessary armor she wears for the world. But underneath, the psychological burden of being the nightmare is immense. It requires constant, relentless commitment to darkness and intensity. There is no room for vulnerability, no space for doubt. She must be the unwavering eradicator every second she is in the public eye. She didn't just return to win a title. She returned to validate a demanding, all-consuming persona. The crown doesn't just symbolize victory. It symbolizes a life lived under the constant, heavy scrutiny of being the benchmark, the one everyone is aiming to surpass. That pressure can be a greater burden than any injury. The constant need to live up to the spectacular fireworks of her own introduction. And here is the deep, lasting consequence. The twist that gives the spectacle its true meaning. Rhea Ripley's return didn't just create a challenger. It created an unbreakable champion. The reigning champion, pushed to the absolute breaking point by the media, the fan doubt, and the constant shadow of the nightmare, finally stopped fighting the noise and started fighting for her own narrative. The psychological warfare intended to break her had, instead, welded her resolve into a diamond. The moment Rhea Spyro erupted, it didn't just announce her return, it also gave the current champion the one thing she lacked: a defining, existential threat to focus her rage. The champion had been fighting against rivals. Now, she was fighting against a legacy. The shame of being called a placeholder fueled a determination that surpassed mere athletic ambition. It became a personal, desperate quest for vindication. Rhea Ripley, the master manipulator, had accidentally given her greatest rival the fuel to become something truly magnificent. By seeking to break the champion's confidence, she had, in fact, forged her into her most formidable and most dangerous opponent. The twist is this: the fire that announced Rhea Ripley's return was the same fire that tempered the champion's soul. The confrontation is no longer just a match. It's a collision between a legend proving her legacy and a champion proving her soul. The seemingly simple viral moment of the return had set the stage for an emotional clash whose outcome, for the first time, is now utterly unpredictable, because a champion who fights for respect is far more dangerous than one who fights for a title.